Hello and welcome to session 7 of the Massage Matters podcast with us, the Massage Collective, myself, Matt Scarsbrook, Anna Maria Mazzieri and Becky DeMott Horton. So this week we have had the absolute pleasure of having Jo Turner come and visit us in the Metaphorical studio, where she's been enlightening us on her work as a life coach, predominantly working with people in the healthcare profession. And today we spend time reflecting away from the clinic and more at the clinician and looking at what it means to really wind down at this time of year. The fact that we need to take a little bit of space, a little bit of time, particularly at the end of 2020 after all the roller coaster year that it has been. We need to be able to celebrate our wins, and we talk a little bit about the backwards planning process that Jo is pretty fond of, and a little bit of insight into the difference between mentoring and coaching. So sit back and enjoy this podcast. It's an absolute cracker, and we'll see you on the other side. Okay, so Jo, thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who haven't yet come across Jo, and her, was it 3 appearances so far on Chewing It Over? Probably, which does make you the highest returner. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but anyway, for people who haven't met you, you're a physio, a Pilates instructor, but predominantly now, as well as a clinic owner, you're a life coach.
That's right.
And helping people predominantly in healthcare professions. So one of the things really we wanted to ask you to come on and talk today, particularly being that we're now so close to Christmas and so close to that kind of classic end of year, but it's by no means been a classic end of year, is how massage therapists in particular can look about trying to look after themselves and look at what they're going to be doing next year in a sort of a nice, kind, compassionate way to take into account the fact that they have had a fairly rough year of it. So Jo, do you want to start by giving us a bit more depth to your background, if you think it's appropriate, and then we can sort of start talking about what it is, your areas of focus at the moment with people?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, the life coaching is quite a recent thing in terms of me formally delivering coaching, but it feels like it's been something that's grown over probably the last 2/3 of my now 24-year-long career. And it really started through my interest in pain management. And the reason I relate it to that is that that was the first point at which I started to realize the complexity of factors that can feed into not only pain, but someone's well-being generally. So it's a little bit abstract from where I am now, but I guess that's where my mind started to stray a little bit from the mainstream, shall we say. And then years went on. I continued to practice broadly as an MSK therapist, but I've owned or co-owned a clinic for the last 10 years, and it's quite a large clinic. So we get young therapists coming through, and I conduct a lot of the one-to-ones. And on reflection, I was spending a lot of my time informally coaching the people that work for me. Often the conversation would start around, what course do you think I should do next? And very quickly it would progress on to how you're doing generally, where do you want to be, what is it you actually want out of your career, how fulfilled are you? And I certainly enjoy working with people in that way. And I feel that the well-being of the people that work for me is part of my responsibility as a business owner. And I guess I have a natural bent towards that kind of care with my patients as well. So a couple of years ago, I found this organisation called One of Many. I spent the first year with them just indulging in lots of personal self-development, and it was fantastic to do something that wasn't directly clinically related. And that led on to a coaching qualification. And I guess it always made the most sense to me to try and feed that back into my life as a physio. And so now what I'm doing is applying those coaching skills to help support physios and healthcare workers, which includes massage therapists, to look after themselves whilst they're looking after everybody else.
Do you think that was something that's, or, obviously you've worked in various settings as well, Jo, both NHS and the clinic you mentioned. Do you think that's something that's generally missing from development of caring professionals, if you like? Their development is around developing their skills or their knowledge, and there's kind of we miss that self-development out a little bit.
I do, yeah. I don't think it's conscious. Quite rightly, the education we receive is around how we practically deliver care to other people. I personally think that it would be a good idea to start right back at training level to introduce some kind of self-care practices alongside how you look after other people. And I think it's also a little bit part of the makeup of people that go into caring professions. I don't know where this belief comes from, but trust me, I've held it too, that somehow the more you look after yourself, the more it detracts from your care for somebody else. But I think more and more we're finding that the relationship that you have with your client, two therapists could deliver exactly the same piece of care, or episode of care. Even the same therapist could deliver the same episode of care at a different time in the year, and how that therapist is in themselves at the point at which they engage in that relationship can significantly affect the outcome of treatment. And I think we need to turn that belief on its head, in that in actual fact, if we don't look after ourselves, that is more likely to diminish the care that we deliver to our clients. And we could debate further how far you take the process of self-development to be for the benefit of other people, because you've got to be careful that you don't just feed into that belief even more. You are actually allowed to look after yourself for your own self as well. But I think it is it's a particularly common trait amongst people that are drawn to caring professions such as ours.
It's a nice time to throw in, I suppose, a little analogy that I use myself, and for the people who've been listening to us and catching up with us know that I've got a history of mental health challenges myself, and one of the key analogies, I suppose, that I talk about, and Jo, you and I have spoken about previously, is to sort of think about that card that sits in the seat in front of you when you're on an aircraft, and it's going, the safety card, and as you go through and it's telling you how to fit your seatbelt and your life jacket, when the oxygen masks drop down, it's very, very clear you should fit your own mask first. And the reason you should fit your own mask first is because if you're not capable of looking after yourself, you're certainly not capable of looking after anyone else. If you're in trouble because you've not fitted your mask first, and then there's just two of you who are in trouble then. And so for me, that idea that you should look after yourself, and I like your point there, Jo, and I think it probably goes further. You're allowed to look after yourself for yourself. You should absolutely be looking after yourself if you're also aiming to look after your clients.
Yes. Yeah, the oxygen mask analogy is used a lot, isn't it? And quite appropriately. And I think also when you are not looking after yourself, your ability to perceive how you come across to other people diminishes as well. So not even that you are showing up differently, your perception of that is less as well, I think.
I think your ability to self-evaluate definitely is affected, isn't it, when you're not. It's so interesting, the point you make, and it's so true. I mean, my background is in an NHS environment, and there is, without having any evidence of this, something about those types of people that are altruistic by nature, aren't they, that seem to think it's self-indulgent to do anything other than care for somebody else. I mean, I've seen people just work themselves into the ground because to do anything but look after somebody else is seen as a luxury and a self-indulgence. And it's so true. And it's not until somebody like yourself actually sits there and points it out that you go, Oh gosh, yeah, that is what we all do, isn't it?
Yeah. And maybe it's taking the philosophy a bit too far, but altruism. The debate is, is there any such thing as true altruism? If we go deeply into it, I think we'd also all admit that there's a process of in caring for other people, and the feedback that you get from that's where you get your sense of achievement and purpose. And yes, that is a useful thing, but you're going back to look after yourself for your own self. You're allowed to fill up your own cup as well, not just keep chucking out to other people in the hope that you'll get enough back to sustain yourself.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a danger there as well, that if you as an individual stake all your value on helping other people, or the reaction that you get from other people when you help them, then it's there's a kind of self-esteem issue there, I guess, around actually having self-efficacy to have that value of your own self without that constant helping everybody out, and the reaction you get from that. It's it's fascinating when you start to think about it.
You can't control that anyway, can you? That's an external
exactly.
thing that you're relying on, which is inconsistent. And as we know, we've all got these stories of, the patient you bend over backwards for, and you think, oh, you've done a brilliant job there. They're just like, yeah, cheers, off they go. And then someone you think you've, oh, it wasn't great today, and that didn't go so well. Yeah, I don't know, 12 bottles of wine. Not allowed to do that anymore, are we?
Definitely hasn't happened yet in my clinic. Hint, hint, clients.
But it's not in your control, is it? Whereas
No.
No, it's sorry to interrupt. A bit of a glitch there, but no, I think it speaks importantly to what as massage therapists we probably ought to be doing, or healthcare professionals ought to be doing generally anyway. I think something that's been particularly key this year is the fact that sense of altruism has then been bashed about, or feels like we've been bashed about a little bit through the handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which, let's not get too deep into that. It is a kind of hopefully once in a lifetime kind of event. However, unfortunately, from a massage therapist perspective, there has been some pretty poor use of language, and some restrictions have been placed on massage therapists because of their sort of perceived position, I suppose, within private healthcare, which has sort of meant that they felt a bit beaten up and bashed about a bit. And it doesn't help when there is quite public demonstration of massage parlors and the, poor terminology, and a sort of almost, it feels like a lack of recognition from the world at large of what it is that therapists are trying to do when they work with their clients. And I think that's very particular for this year, and therapists, as we get towards the end of the year, and I think we'll come on a little bit shortly to talk about kind of ideas that you've got around what perhaps we should be doing at this time of year to kind of help look after ourselves. But I think therapists also have, and I think this speaks to all private practitioners as well as NHS actually, is that you get exposed to clients who have backstories that are also very emotionally draining. And we're not counselors, but that still doesn't stop the client in front of us telling us a story that actually, if you're trying to be empathetic with that client, can be really tough on you as a therapist, actually. And it reminds me of a point you made, and I think it was whilst you were talking to Jack, around this minister that you saw. And do you mind just expanding on that point?
Yeah, it was a story I was telling about when I was a very junior physio working in London, and I was treating a minister, and I don't actually recall that his case was particularly draining for me, but he was just asking me about my work, and he made some comment to the effect of, where do you go for your sabbatical or your retreat? And I just looked blank and said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you must get that kind of some space to download and retreats. And I said, no, just carry on. And he was absolutely amazed. You know, he said, but you're working all day, every day, as you say, Matt, listening to people's stories and troubles, and you know, whether or not you can come up with a solution for them, you're absorbing them. And he was really surprised and quite upset for us as a profession that we didn't have that kind of system in place and that support. And just going back to your earlier points, Matt, I have massage therapists working for me and my co-director at the clinic, and yeah, I have been horrified on your behalf at the language used. What's been lovely in our clinic actually is that it's a multidisciplinary clinic, and all of us physios, chiros, reception team, you know, we've been really supportive, and there's been a lot of conversation within our WhatsApp groups and things like that to just really try and reassure our therapists that absolutely is not how we see them. And I personally think it was not really, but just about forgivable the first time. But there must have been feedback. And when it came through in the second lockdown as well, I was really disappointed for you guys.
I think that was a real kick in the teeth, because I think everybody had felt we'd made a little bit of progress, albeit baby steps, but yeah, and it was a bit of a kick in the teeth. What I'd be really interested to know, obviously it's a massive thing to get into, but briefly, if you can, what would be your advice to therapists for dealing with that, and for dealing with that kind of, as Matt mentioned, that lack of recognition they felt this year, and maybe that assault on their profession almost?
Well, actually, Becky, I'll refer back to something I heard you say. I think you were talking to Jack as well when you said this. You were talking about how the pandemic has almost brought all of you massage therapists out of the woodwork. And it's happened in physio as well, for sure. And almost made it a necessity to create these environments where you can share your stories and talk to each other. And it's almost like we've never had to defend much before, but now we have, and that's quite a unifying cause. You know, I think it's such a shame that you have to do it, but my advice would be start by supporting each other and reach out to the allied health professions that you tend to work alongside, because you know, if my clinic is a small little test case, you absolutely are supported by the professionals you work alongside and the ones you support. Talk about it first. And I think, and again, it's happening in physio. It strikes me that you know, if other people don't understand our identity, we're obviously not talking about it enough. And if we're not talking about it enough, is that because we don't understand it enough ourselves? And I think maybe if you can see it as an opportunity to start defining what you do better and establishing more unified ways of talking about your professions. But start by talking to each other about it, I would say.
Yeah.
And what I must admit, I'm really pleased about, sort of as an observer, I suppose, of the industry at large, is actually how well people have come together. You know, for the evils that are social media and the life drain that they can be, they've also been a bit of a godsend at times. And you know, some of the groups that have cropped up as a result of COVID, or some of the groups who maybe have swelled in numbers, you know, were there before but perhaps have swelled in numbers. The number of therapists sharing information, helping each other out, it feels like it's broken down a lot of barriers that might have existed before around things like fear of competition. You know, you don't want to share kind of business related info because actually, you know, what they nick my clients kind of. But actually, that seems to have fallen away, you know, quite significantly, and people are, you know, I lurking around on some of the forums, you see people sharing some really nice stories, both in terms of how they feel right now, be it very high or really low, and then people stepping in to either congratulate or commiserate and actually sort of support. There's a lot of emotional support at the moment out there, which is lovely to see.
Yes, there's a lot of compassion just coming through, isn't there? And it's almost like we've been given permission to express that to each other. which again is not an avenue that it's all been going to our clients, hasn't it? And we probably do inherently feel compassion for each other, but we haven't had a situation where it's particularly, we haven't had to support each other in this way. And I think it's almost like a dam has been opened and we're quenching a thirst that we didn't even know we had before.
Yeah, and I've heard from a lot of massage therapists in particular that actually they felt very isolated before this, and I think that's quite typical. Is that we've said before, a lot of people come to soft tissue therapy, massage therapy later in life as a vocational training course. They do go through their training and then they go and set up their business, and that's it. Unless you go and work in a multidisciplinary clinic or a clinic where there's a number of therapists, you are very much on your own and feel a little bit isolated and like you've got no colleagues. So I think that's something that I've heard a lot from therapists, and hopefully this is a change that might see the end of that feeling of isolation. I hope.
I'd probably take that just one step further and actually say, even in a multidisciplinary clinic, it's quite common, or at least my experience has been, it's quite common to find yourself all behind closed doors because of the nature of our job. And it's been lovely listening to Jo actually, and in various instances, describe how she's brought the team together and how the team's responded in your own clinics, Jo, to almost try and intentionally or otherwise, but remove this idea that actually you're all sort of just passing each other, ghost passing in the night kind of thing, because actually you're just behind the closed door all day.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of good coming out of a really hard situation, I think.
So let's look kind of forward-ish. So it's obviously very nearly Christmas, and with this time of year, obviously we tend to start, if we haven't already, it won't be long before people start thinking, well, what am I doing next year? How am I going to generally the theme is be better, to grow, to in some way exceed the year before. And I must admit that whilst I totally get it, it totally wound me up when I was in a sales job, because it's like, hang on, I just bust my backside hitting my targets for this year, and now you've added 5% for next year. But obviously, that is sort of the nature of things. But under normal circumstances, people perhaps don't often take enough time at this time of year to reflect, to slow down, to touch base, and perhaps this year more than many before is a time that sort of is required. So what kind of processes would you be going through at this time of year? What kind of things might you be recommending that your therapists, your clients might be considering at this time of year?
Sure. Well, let's pretend this is a normal year. Even in a normal year at this time, I would be advising my clients to follow what the season is doing. So, whether you're a nature lover or not, you can't help but notice that things are slowing down out there. I do spend lots of time in nature, and it's one of my real needs. So I will talk about it in that way. So we're definitely at the end of autumn, going into winter, and it's a time of year where everything is slowing down, and I use the phrase going back to the earth. So there's a period of time of recovery, and even in a normal year, you will probably have been going at things pretty hard. We come out the summer holidays, and the school term feels like a new start. You often start new projects then, and I think late summer, early autumn is often a very active time, and there is a temptation to keep going, and then this concept of new year gets thrown at you as well. Not thrown at you, it's in everybody's head, but the media often will throw all these new year things at you very early, and there's this sort of notion that right now, ramp it up again, off we go again, and you can't just keep upping and upping and upping. You've got to find some point at which you stop, replenish, and make yourself ready for the next period of work. If you don't mind me going off a little side alley, a mentor and good friend of mine, Jo Martin, told this lovely metaphor story, which I'll paraphrase for time. But essentially, she talked about this expedition leader. He took an expedition out to a volcano in South America, and the idea was to hire a local team with Sherpas, and the work needed to be done near the mouth of the volcano. So this group set off, and they walked through the foothills and up the side of the volcano for days on end, really hard walking. And the Sherpa was leading the way. And then they literally got within sight of the summit of the volcano, and the Sherpa said, right, now we're going to stop and set up camp here. And it was only midday that day, and the leader of the expedition is going, what are you talking about? No, I can see the top of the volcano. We're not stopping now. Come on, we've got work to do. And the Sherpa says, yes, we have the work, but we don't have the energy for the work yet. We've been walking hard for days now. We've done well, but what we need to do now is sit and rest and wait for our souls to catch up.
Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? Isn't that beautiful?
And I think that's a lovely analogy for this time of year. Give your soul a little bit of time to catch up, because you need your soul for whatever it is you're planning in the new year. Now, just to go back to the fact that this isn't a normal year, and particularly from what I understand has been going on for massage therapists, where because of circumstances, you may have this little voice saying to you, well, you've done less work than normal, so you've had actually a bit of free time, and physically you haven't done as much as you normally do. But goodness me, your brain has been working like Billy, I imagine, if it's anything like mine. Months and months and months of taking information, assimilating it, working out what to do, putting it into practice, then it changes again. So you start the process again. The mental load this year has been absolutely exhausting. So my advice would be, first acknowledge that, and really acknowledge it. Don't just go, oh yeah, it was really tough. Yeah, really tough. Actually take yourself through what you've had to think through and work out. And this winding down process this year particularly might need to be more of a mental winding down. Allow yourself that time to just stop trying to work everything out. And at the moment, stop trying to think about next year. Just finish this one off before you think about the next one.
Yeah, that's such an important point, Jo. And I was guilty of it myself. And in October, funnily enough, before the second lockdown was announced, I was exhausted, and I was thinking to myself, oh, I could really do with a week off. And then I started thinking, what are you talking about? You had 4 months off, and you start beating yourself up for being lazy. And then I was like, I didn't have 4 months off at all. Like, I had no idea how I was going to pay the bills, and I was worried about money, and I was worried about my family, and I was worried about my job and my business. And it wasn't, and I've said that to various therapists that have said the same thing. It wasn't 4 months off at all. It was 4 months of intense pressure and stress. And yes, you might not have been doing your normal work, but goodness, it wasn't a rest at all. And again, coming back to that, not falling into the trap of thinking it's self-indulgent. There is certainly nothing self-indulgent at the moment about saying, do you know what, I just need a break from like you say, from thinking.
Yeah.
I can't remember which forum it was in. It might have been Sports Injury Fix. But a question was asked either just before lockdown ended, or just at the first lockdown, or just after it ended. I remember it was about that period anyway. And the question generally was asked, what did you enjoy over that period? What do you wish you'd done more of? Sort of thing. And actually the number one I wish I had done was take a break.
Yeah.
Because in that first period, it was just like, I need to rescue my business that requires that I'm face on with people. And the number one response was take a break. And I swore to my wife that if there was another lockdown, I'd take a break. And lockdown number 2 was arranged. And what was the first thing we did? Lockdown lunches every single day, which was amazing. I'm so glad we did it. They were brilliant, but it didn't count as a break. And even now, post second lockdown, I made the decision I wasn't opening clinic again until the new year, because I just didn't need the additional stress. So I'll be really looking forward to get back to my clients when I reopen. But it's that first kind of, for me, it's that first stage of wind down. I can't come to a complete stop because I'll just blame myself. I'll be like, oh no, I can't possibly do it, but I can possibly wind down a bit. My dad used to refer to it, and still does, as fire gazing time.
Yeah.
Sort of time where you're literally just staring at the flames, letting just life wash over you, let your mind kind of go where it needs to go, without judgment, without worry, and more importantly, without a screen in front of it, I think.
No, you're right. It needs to be done in phases, and I think, again, going back to what we were saying earlier about therapists, it's quite triggering for anyone in a caring profession to think about doing less. And winding down doesn't actually necessarily mean that. I mean, I've got the most annoying monkey brain on the planet, and I can't just make it say less. I've got to do something active. And, for me, meditation is an active, conscious choice that I have to do, to make my brain change gear. I can't just go, oh yeah, great, I've got a day off, so I'm going to wind down, because my brain will go, oh, but you could redecorate the bathroom and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So I have to bring in some other active activity, to replace what I was doing before. I can't just go, yes, let's go down a gear and it'll all be fine.
The first time you and sorry, Becky. I was going to say,
No,
the first time you and I met, we decided to get out and we went for a walk around an arboretum,
yes.
and that was our first meeting and chat. And actually, it was lovely. It wasn't work, but it was work.
Yeah, even in the rain, it was great.
And you made that point on when I heard you on Jack as well, that which I think is really important, is you said about you've worked to identify what are your must-do things for your own well-being. And I think can you talk a little bit about that, because I think I found that really useful.
Yeah, it's so it's a very personal thing, and when I'm working with clients, I take them through this process of identifying their needs. So if you don't fulfill your basic needs, and when I was talking with Jack, I was explaining that we're talking here about getting yourself to an okay state, not deliriously happy, joyous, swinging from the rafters. It's just, I'm all right, life's ticking along quite well. If you don't know what gets you to that state, and you perpetually function slightly below that okay line, and then you do a profession that requires you to be generous and give out to people, you are going to have to fill that pot with something. And I talked about this notion of desires, which gets a bad rap sometimes, as if desire is a dreadful thing. But in this context, the point I was making was that if you don't fulfill your needs pot with the things that you regularly can do, you're going to turn to desires, and it might be alcohol, it might be overexercise, it might be overeating, whatever. And something that could be a joyous, pleasurable thing like a piece of chocolate just becomes something you chuck in your mouth. You don't even taste it. It's the basic need in that case might have been sleep, okay? But because you're tired, you go for a sugar hit, and yes, it fulfills it. It changes that state for that moment, but it isn't the need that you were lacking. That sleep was the one that you needed, and so. Yeah, what I was talking to Jack about was identifying your set of 5 or 6 criteria that will keep you ticking over and okay. So I've already explained one of mine is nature, and literally I have to be out in nature every single day, even if it's 15 minutes. I prefer more than that, but and it's funny in that I don't even remember that I need it until the moment where I step out of the door with the morning with the dog, and then oh yeah, that's one of my basic needs. But I would avoid that walk at 7 o'clock in the morning every day if I was listening to my logic mind. But having identified that is one of my needs, it's now just a thing that I do. And another one of mine is creativity. So we all work in largely science-based professions. If I don't allow the creative side of my brain to play every now and then, I get very frustrated and a little depressed and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not okay. Other obvious ones, sleep, good food, stuff like that. But the point is, you need to spend some time working out what your particular set of basic needs are. And then the hard thing is actually making yourself fulfill them. But it's to get yourself to that point where you're okay. And then if you can give yourself a little bit more, you've then got something to give. Whereas if you start giving from okay, then the only place to go is lower.
Yeah.
it's a little bit. You could draw kind of analogies to. I think you might have done even. It might have been you. I'm quoting, Joe. This is terrible, isn't it? But essentially, this idea of tissue capacity before injury. That tissue has a capacity before things start to go wrong. We have capacity before things start to go wrong, and actually, it's about identifying how we can increase that capacity. How do we strengthen, and that's fundamentally feed our needs, which is where we're talking to there, and identifying the load, as it were, in this analogy, and either trying to minimize it or at least manage it so that it all happen all at the same time and wipe you out.
Yeah, no, tissue. Yeah, the strength of tissues was something relevant to obviously both our professions. And I think the phrase that you're referring to, I'd said that tissues fail at the point where they have absorbed more load than they are able to tolerate for a long enough period of time. Yeah, they will fail, and we're no different.
Yeah.
And
no, Becky, you go.
Sorry. I like you saying there about identifying, actually upfront identifying what those needs are. And I don't know if you find, but I think I've found when I've thought about it, actually that does reduce that feeling of guilt and of indulgence that, mine, I'm lucky with where I live, but one of mine is being around the ocean. And I know that if I haven't been there for a couple of days, that I'm not very happy. And it's always before felt to me like, oh, come on, Becky, you've got work to do. You can't just go and play in the sea. But actually knowing that that's something that keeps me ticking over and that keeps me happy and keeps me able to give, almost gives me that permission to go and do that thing. And I think that's important for us, isn't it, when we're allocating our time.
That permission word's come up again, hasn't it? I mean, frankly, we're such a bunch of saddos, aren't we, that we need permission for all this.
Isn't that awful?
We may as well accept that we do. And if we find something that makes it more acceptable to us, then yeah, great.
Language, and this is definitely a tangent, but language is actually really powerful, isn't it, when it comes to this kind of thing? The idea that we need permission. We often fill our vocabulary in reference to things that we're doing with musts and shoulds, as opposed to sort of mays and maybes, and even unconsciously it adds to the pressure to kind of to do those things or to not do those things. Oh, I shouldn't have that, or I shouldn't do this. And it's like, well, actually, you probably should, or maybe it's not the best choice today, but why not? It's a sort of that element of there's a lot of finality, I think, in the language that we use that doesn't help us when things are not that specific.
No. A friend of mine, another coach, put something on online somewhere yesterday. She said, go through your list of shoulds. I should do this, I shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And change every single one of them to, I decide to eat well for the next week, or I decide to improve my sleep. And I heard someone else today talking about burnout and how they're always being told that they might burn out, but actually they don't feel they're in danger of it because they enjoy what they do. And it occurred to me that the difference is whether there's conscious choice involved in your actions or not. So feeling like you're overworked at the behest of somebody else is a lot more tiring, I think, than having chosen activities because they fulfill needs in you and excite you and light you up. I think the chance of burnout is much less if there's active choice involved.
Absolutely. So, and then in practical terms, then for sort of therapists at this time of year, and therapists of all flavors, but massage therapists in terms of who we're talking about today, then we've got that we should have a wind down phase.
Yeah.
We should have a period of time when actually we consciously make the decision to wind down and start reflecting, I think, on what has been. And part of that comes into something you've touched on previously, which is celebrating our wins. Do you mind just touching on that briefly? Sort of why is that important?
So I think celebrating wins is part of the wind down process. particularly this year when there's been so much to talk about in terms of what has gone wrong or not gone how we would have wanted it to go. There are so many wins that we can draw on, and I won't go into it again now, but I talked about the success within my team as one of the things I really wanted to celebrate this year. And all you're doing is you're giving your brain a little dopamine hit, and you're going, yeah, that was good. And you're reminding your brain, you're sending a message to calm that little voice that constantly wants the next achievement hit. And the imposter voice, if you're familiar with the concept of imposter syndrome. If we don't celebrate what we have achieved, then our brain registers a barren desert that needs watering again. Whereas actually, if we celebrate those wins, there's a conscious recognition, and it slightly calms that little achiever voice, which we all have. It's part of our nature, isn't it? So, two things. I think there's that. It registers the good stuff. It gives that dopamine hit, and it also, I think, helps you to identify the things that really are important to you, because you tend to remember and celebrate the things that impacted you and meant something to you. And the chances are, if something in the last 6 months meant something to you and had an impact, it's probably going to be something that will be beneficial to look at incorporating into next year. Certainly worth thinking about anyway. And some of your wins surprise you, I think. Maybe some of the things you thought you didn't enjoy, the way you had to cope with them in through the COVID period may have made you reframe and think, well, actually, that particular aspect of that task I really do enjoy. I just had to approach it a different way, and maybe I'll take that through into my planning for next year.
And I wonder, Jo, do you think we have to be careful when we're going through that process of, I think this is something I've been guilty of as well in the past, is looking for massive achievements. So we kind of look back and almost go, right, I'm gonna go through that process Jo talked about of celebrating my wins. Well, hang on a minute, I didn't make a huge amount of profit, or I didn't grow my business by 25%. And we're looking for those massive things, and maybe sometimes we need to just dial that down a little bit and appreciate that there are lots of wins that might not and might also be a little bit left field sometimes, not be those usual things you look for.
Absolutely. And yesterday so I've got a 16-year-old son doing his mocks at the moment, and he's fairly typical 16-year-old. Hopefully he'll never hear this, because if he knows that I've talked about him in public, he will leave home. But yesterday, after it's a difficult year by the nature of the fact that he's a 16-year-old boy and I'm his mum, and he's doing his exams. But yesterday on my birthday, he hugged me and he said, "Mum, you're doing a great job at seeing me through year 11. Then he told me the music I was listening to was shit and I could turn it off. But normal, everything was normalized again. Yeah. But that is actually a massive win, and it's about, as you say, Becky, readjusting your goalposts. So actually, there are all sorts of things that my achiever brain wants for my son, and they go to ridiculous levels if I let them into the future. Whereas, in actual fact, if I can just calm my monitor brain down to the point where, if he gets through his exams and he's happy and he gets the ticket to whatever he wants the next stage to be, that's where my comfort level needs to be. So the win at the moment is that he is happy at the moment, and that needs to be celebrated.
So in terms of thinking a bit practically now, so regular listeners are aware that we do something called theory to practice, where we try and take an element of what we've discussed and talk about how we might be able to apply that in clinic the next day, typically. Now, what we're actually talking about today is less to do with clinical practice and more to do with, well-being and looking at yourself as a therapist. And so if we sort of think about looking ahead into next year, when we've gone through our period of wind down, what sort of practical things can therapists be doing? You have a sort of a slight alternative to a planning process, don't you?
Yeah, it's a sort of, well, I call it a backwards planning process, but actually it's based on a method I was taught by my coaching organisation, and its actual name is soft power planning, and there's a whole explanation behind that name, so I won't go into that now. But what you're essentially doing is you're creating a vision and then working backwards from it. So I actually was, and still am, quite a resistant planner. I don't write lists. I didn't used to like being asked at parties what I was going to do in 10 years' time. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing in 10 minutes' time. But actually, this process helps me to know what I'm doing in 10 minutes' time. And the point is to create something that's so inspiring that it keeps drawing you forward for long enough, and it keeps inspiring you for long enough, as opposed to the short wins that we tend to set up for ourselves, or what we perceive will be short, quick wins around New Year, usually based on some external factor that happens to be important to us on about the 27th of December. And but it doesn't really have any, even if we do what we say we're going to do, it doesn't have any great importance for us, and it isn't going to keep drawing us forward for very long, probably just until the next box of chocolates comes in mid-January or something. So the point is that it doesn't matter how far in the future that vision is. It could be this time next year, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. It depends on the magnitude of the thing you're thinking about. But the most important thing is to give it enough time. So create a vision of how you are going to be at this point in the future. What are you going to be doing? Who's going to be around you? What's it going to feel like to be you at that time? If it was a picture, put loads of colour in it. And I'm speaking metaphorically, but you could draw it if you want to. Make it as detailed and as clear in your mind as you can. And make sure that it's the right vision. So when you think about it, there's got to be an element of joy and pleasure that bubbles up inside you, okay? Because it's got to be a strong enough draw. So what you do then is you ask yourself a series of questions, and you imagine that you're actually out there, let's say 5 years' time, living your vision. Okay, you are that person that you've created in your mind. So you say to yourself, where I am now, what was I doing 12 months after December 2020 in order to be on the path to where I have now got to? And then there'll be a series of things in place. I don't know, it might be that I bought a new house, or I had started a new job, or whatever. So just some fairly concrete things. And at this stage, they're still quite broad in terms of goals. And then you ask yourself the same question: in order to have got to that point at 12 months, where would I have needed to be 9 months from December 2020? Then you go back 6 months and 3 months. So you get to the point where 3 months from now, so looking into spring next year, you have a very clear set of criteria of what needs to be in place. And that's when action starts to come in, because visions are lovely. And depending on your personality, I could spend hours creating visions and mood boards and all the rest of it. I'm definitely a natural blue sky thinker. Sometimes it's the actual bringing it into action that I struggle with. But with this clear idea, okay, in 3 months, I'm telling myself these things need to be in place, and they're still enticing because they still relate to that wonderful vision. They're not things to beat myself over the head with. They're things that are going to lead me to that place I really want to be. So what does that mean I need to be doing next month? And what do I need to be doing next week? And what is the one thing I could do tomorrow that will start me off on that path? And it might be pick up the phone and talk to Max Scarsbrook about some crazy idea I've got. All right. But it's a specific action. And even for someone like me who doesn't like planning, that then becomes manageable. And the flip side is also sometimes when you go through that process, you get people to talk through the 3 months, and there's so much in that 3 month period, they realize actually that's completely unachievable. So I've got to shift some of those things into the 6 month and the 9 month mark, and it makes everything clear and that the path is laid out. But the overriding point is it's always leading to that vision which you created and is your vision, and it excites you so much that it's going to keep drawing you on for long enough.
I suppose it helps reduce the risk of becoming overwhelmed by the gulf between now and the vision. as well,
Yes.
which is definitely something that I suffer from periodically. You know, I've got things that I'd love to do for my clients and for the community, and I look at it and I go, I have no idea how I go from here today to there tomorrow, you know, there over the time period. But breaking things down into small steps it does make it far less overwhelming.
And if it is a big project, there's also that tendency, isn't there, to do a million things in the first week and exhaust yourself.
And never finish any of them.
No, exactly.
That I love the fact that as well, like you say, that you can tie that into when you do that process of identifying your wins. Actually, what was it that you got to the end of the year that did give you that buzz, and then thinking, okay, if I need something that's still going to excite me in 5 years' time, those are the things that meant something to me after 12 months.
Yeah.
So how do I because it's so easy, isn't it? I think whether it's because we don't enjoy the process or it's just easier, it's so easy to default to those like you say, those kind of I don't know what I'm trying to say, sorry, those quite standard goals, if that makes sense, of, you know, okay, I'm going to have this many clients, I'm going to have this many clinics, so, you know, and they're not exciting necessarily. Oh, you know, it's very difficult to stay motivated for that, isn't it? So I really like that idea of actually you have to go through a process of finding out what fires you up.
Yes, it's sorry, Matt, go on.
No, you could. Sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I've been asked quite a lot recently about my thoughts around the differentiation between mentoring and coaching, and then that point isn't relevant to this conversation, but I've come up with a little definition for myself that mentoring is deciding what you want to do and how you're going to do it. Coaching is around working out who you want to be and why. And the traditional goal setting is all about deciding what you want to do and how you're going to do it. But without the understanding who you want to be and why you want to be it, you run out of motivation pretty quickly. And it may well be that you need 50 new patients in the next 3 months, but that needs to be because it leads you to be the type of clinician that you want to be, and you know the reason why you want to be that type of clinician. Therefore, those 50 patients need to fit a certain criteria. You can get really stuck in lots of hamster on the treadmill doing without ever really understanding why. But the why will come and get you, because the why is the thing that makes you stop and feel disillusioned and think, oh, can I keep doing this? And that's what the vision is about. That's putting the purpose and the being and the why into what you're doing.
Yeah.
Tom Colwell, who came on our final lockdown lunch, actually spoke to that as well. Actually, this idea of identifying. It depends how you want to phrase it. Your brand, who is brand you, and which is obviously quite an external thing. You know, how should people perceive you? But to be able to do that and come up with something that is meaningful, you have to know who you are and what makes you tick. And you know, talking from personal experience, that is one of the hardest things to do, and probably one of the things that we spend the least amount of time considering. You know, when you set up your brand as a business, is it you've just found cool words or a color scheme, or is it that you've genuinely sat down and you've identified, this is me through and through, like this business is representative of what I want to do, and trying to put a bit of a positive spin, I suppose, on this year and the circumstances under which massage therapists found themselves. What I hope, and it won't apply to everyone because circumstances have been all over the shop, but what I hope is that some people have had the opportunity to discover things that they like doing and things that they definitely don't like doing that they would never have explored had it not been for lockdown. So I'm sure that there are umpteen parents out there who have decided that not being a teacher was the right choice. And yet there will be a handful of therapists who have gone, actually, you know, teaching wasn't so bad. Maybe I actually quite enjoy imparting knowledge. That there'll be people who have gone, personally, no. I'm trying to be
they must be out there.
but equally, there'll be people out there who finally sat down and actually started looking at their marketing and have realised they have a real passion for or interest in digital marketing or creativity that they just didn't have time to do when they were doing 10-hour days in clinic. And maybe that leads to somewhere, as you said, and Becky picked up on this, what is it? What are my wins? What have I enjoyed? What can I build upon? I think, and even on a clinical basis, something that's stood out to me is because certain of my client base had to shield and I couldn't see them, it made me realize how much I enjoy working with that particular client base.
Right.
And as kind of gone, when they're in the mix, then it's just a good day when I see one, but I haven't necessarily drilled down to go, why was it a good day? And actually, when I've gone, oh, it's a good day because I've worked with the type of client that actually really gets me going.
Yeah.
That's quite nice as well. And it means that on reflection, I can think maybe I want to just fine tune what I do and who I work with in order just to keep getting that feel good.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. And without that process of almost removing and then reselecting certain clients, it just becomes this melee of clients, doesn't it? And you probably never even considered that there was a difference between the ones that you have found you particularly enjoy treating and not.
Absolutely. So just respectful of your time today, Joe, then. So in sort of a summary, what would be kind of the key things that we've discussed today that you would want people to go away and be considering perhaps over the longer term, and then that kind of thing that they could, sit down and do tomorrow once they've found some time?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've talked broadly around 3 stages, haven't we, of slowing down, acknowledging and celebrating wins, and then looking at what you want to take from that to carry forward from next year. So what can you do tomorrow? You could look at your diary over the time between now and Christmas, and just look at it and think, does that look like a slowing down diary, or is it a winding up diary? How am I going to feel when I get to the 23rd, 24th of December? And be really strict with yourself. We always think that everything in our diary is absolute and must happen, but I guarantee there will be things in that diary every single day that could be shifted or changed or altered or even cancelled. So if necessary, I would do some culling of your diary, and then look at what you could build in that just speaks to this idea of shifting what's going on in your head at the moment. Is there one practice, a walk at the end of the day, a 10-minute meditation, whatever? Is there one thing that you can bring in that will just shift you onto a different path than the one that you perhaps were heading towards Christmas and the end of the year on? That would be my advice. Think about those 3 stages and then start looking at the next couple of weeks and just see if you can introduce that winding down process.
That's lovely. And so without diving too deeply, what have you got coming up? What are you hoping to do as part of your wind down? And then just as importantly, where can people find out a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing?
Okay, well, I actually went through that process that I've just described, and I've made some conscious choices to delay the start of some really exciting things, and that I decided if they didn't happen on January the 1st, then I failed some internal test. So I've given myself permission to push those forward so that I can let myself off some of the frantic preparation phase that would necessarily have had to happen in December. So that sort of conscious winding down. I have upped my nature appreciation. I've been taking a lot more photos, and I've been slowing down. There's some amazing skies at the moment, so I've been consciously stopping and looking at those. So just mindfulness, really just introducing more of that into my regular routine. And what was the other question? Oh, where can people get me? So I am most active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I'm a little bit active on Twitter, but I've had massive Twitter fear until recently. I'm just starting to feel a little bit braver about that. So yes, talk to me on Twitter, and you'll be aiding my therapy as well. So yeah, those two platforms really, LinkedIn and Twitter.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming in and talking to us this afternoon. It's been what I hope will be for people a really lovely episode to help them reflect on this year, the good and the bad, but hopefully give them some really solid foundations for next year, which is not going to be easy to start with. So we need to look after ourselves and be in a really good place to get stuck in. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been really, really good fun chatting to you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo.
Now, go on. Tell me that wasn't brilliant. And you haven't now got some really good ideas for what you're going to do over the Christmas period to properly wind down and give yourself a decent break so that you can come back and kick ass in 2021 with some really good planning principles in place as well. So thank you ever so much for Jo Turner coming on and speaking to us this week. We, as the Massage Collective, have loads of really exciting stuff coming up in 2021 for you to watch out for and join us in, which we will be getting stuck into just as soon as we have also taken a decent break after what has been a heck of a year with, yes, its lows, but also actually some really good highs as well. So thank you so much for joining us this year. It's been an absolute pleasure having you along. As always, you can find us at the Massage Collective on Facebook, _Massage Collective on Instagram, and you can always email us with any questions, queries, or just to have a chat at massage@physio-matters.com. Which means that all that remains for us to say at the end of 2020 is have a very Merry Christmas, take care of yourselves, look after each other, and we will see you bright and early in January 2021.